So this one will be in English, unfortunately. I hope it will be understandable. So we're going to talk about the changes in cyber attacks, and during the session itself, we'll rethink the vulnerability management that we have. We'll talk a little bit about the rapid pace of attack acceleration. It will go through low and slow attacks, and then how we can automate them and how attackers can really understand how to navigate through an organization, and then how they can automate their attacks in the future in a very interesting way. We'll talk about that as well. And then we'll cover the concept of how do we pump the brake? How do we, I would say, paralyze the attacker in a different concept? So we'll cover all of these in the next 20 minutes or so. And the first part, if I look back on vulnerabilities, and the best or the most common solution today is a patching mechanism. So we have a vulnerability, we identify it, and then we patch the systems. This is obviously something that takes time, and if you want to patch all kinds of systems that people want to be very careful with this approach. Now, in terms of, if I look at this process, and if we look at the low and slow attacks, the ones that are under the radar, it gives enough time to patch those systems, and then it makes it more feasible to stop these types of attacks when it comes to exploitations. If we look at the numbers, and this one is based on Skybox Security, so we can see that we have, from 2016 to 2017, 125% growth in new vulnerabilities. The thing that is a little bit strange here is that only 12% is in growth of number of exploits that were actually used during that time, and that's a report from 2018. Another interesting thing is in the exploit kits. So we're seeing a decline in exploit kits that were created from 2016 to 2018. And if we think about it, that's because if I'm an attacker and I want to develop an exploit kit, I need time, I need resources, I need money. And that's very expensive for me to develop something like this. And obviously, if I'm being detected, it's being less economical for me to develop even more. So I need to find something that will be a little bit more easy, and something that my risk will be around zero risk for the attackers themselves. So today's weapon of choice, credentials and connections. And I'm pretty sure that, if you land inside any kinds of network, you have few options of attacks. And if we're talking about the increase of the use of credentials and connections, you can see the number from different types of vendors, from Verizon to Centrify and then to Proofpoints, that there is an increase of usage of credentials and connections in cyber attacks. So you land inside a network, you try to orient yourself, we'll talk about the kill chain in a few slides, and then you navigate around the network in order to find how to get a domain dominance, and then afterwards execute your malicious plan. Now, if we look at that one, this is an interesting one, because using native connectivities for attackers is, as I mentioned, the lowest risk, because if I manage to find a user and all I have to do is try to authenticate with this user to a neighbor computer, the worst thing from my perspective that can happen today as an attacker is a failed login. So I didn't succeed in order to jump from one computer to another. And then I can use any user that I manage to find on this computer until I succeed. And the vulnerability management programs that exist today, they didn't adopt the change of using credentials and connections by cyber attackers. And if we look on this front, so they are, attackers today are very automated, and I'll give you an example in a second. I hope the video won't kill our ears because there are big speakers in here. So they didn't adapt to that, and therefore there is a huge hole when it comes to attacks that are using credentials and connections inside the network. Now, if we look at the kill chain itself, and you see big parts here, that in order to get domain dominance, which is around the middle of the slide, you can see that it goes through weeks of activities from local privilege escalation and compromised credentials, admin recon, until I manage to get into the domain controller. Now today, if I'm an attacker and I land on a certain computer, it takes me weeks in order to perform these activities. And then once I get the domain dominance, I need to use the payload in order to do whatever I came to do, whether it will be to take the organization down, steal money, or do whatever malicious action that I have. So let's see, just quickly focus on the weeks part. So how fast can I get domain dominance inside an organization? Now, for that, we have more or less 6 steps. And in this case, I use general names. So let's say that the reception PC, I'm an attacker, I landed on the receptionist PC. I'm looking at the name of the user that I have on this computer. I see a username called Alex. Alex probably is the reception. And then I can see that Alex has a session to the reception PC. But what I also see is that Alex is in a group called GNA. And GNA also an admin to room 2. So it could be a conference room that we are using in our company. Another interesting thing is that I see that Ilya has session to room 2. Now, the fact that he has a session to it means that I can, if I'm an attacker and I compromise the room 2 computer, I can basically harvest Ilya's credentials. And then I can see by looking around the computers around me that Ilya is also an admin to DB admin PC, which is, has a session to domain admin help desk. So for me as an attacker, I perform these steps in order to get the domain dominance in the network. So let's see an example of how it looks in Mimikatz, for example. So I managed to extract credentials of user 1 who is logged in onto this local computer. Then I try to find around using NetView commands or others, neighbor computers that I have next to me. And then by executing a simple WMI command, I can see that I found another machine that user 1 is admin to. So basically, what I can do is using psexec, I can move laterally to the neighbor computer, this Windows 7x64, use the clear text password that I managed to find, and then afterwards, I'm discovering that I have an administrator account on this specific computer. And there you can see the administrator on the PowerShell or Mimikatz command on the right-hand side. Now, this process, as I mentioned, can take a few weeks. That is a little bit problematic from the attacker perspective because they want to make it a little bit faster. So in this case, there is a very interesting tool out there. Pretty sure that the majority of you are familiar with this tool called Bloodhound. A very sophisticated group created it. And what they're basically doing is, this is an open source tool that can allow you navigate around and find users and credentials until you get into a domain admin user. Now, just to orient yourselves, so we're talking about computer, group, and user, edges, it has a session, admin to, or a member of, and then just to show the connection, this is more or less how it looks inside the tool itself. Now, just to show you how it looks from the Bloodhound GUI, you can see that I have the domain admin group on the right-hand side. And if I'm starting on the right-hand side, that can be my path to a domain admin inside the network. Now, Bloodhound is a great tool. It's an open source tool, and obviously can show you how you can get into a domain admin based on one computer and the network around it. And that's very well, I would say, executed by Bloodhound themselves. Now, I understand how I need to move inside a network, but I don't know how I can actually perform the actions in an automated way. Everything is manual in this process. Hopefully I don't have audio on this one, so we'll see if it won't be too loud. So what we're going to do is that we're going to use a tool called Go Fetch, which is after I manage to find what options I have using Bloodhound in order to move from one computer to another until a domain admin, I can actually execute commands and then get the actual lateral movement inside the network until I get into a domain admin. So let's have a look how it looks from the commands perspective. So I'm orient myself, who am I? Trying to find this computer. I see that this is user one that is on the computer, and what is the host name? I can see the host name. And then I want to understand what are my pathways from this user into the computers. And I want to reach to the end goal. From here, throughout these users and computers, until I get into a domain admin session. So I want to execute my lateral movement module, and I'm invoking Go Fetch, and then I'm starting the process of execution. And we'll see it on the other computer. You will see the different commands that are running in my PowerShell. So the first step is going from the first computer. I'll refresh my screen. I'll see what type of connection I have now. So I'm on this computer right now. I managed to get control over. Then I want to move to the next computer. So I'm keep going on the automation and then refresh. We'll get into the next computer right now. So you see it at the top. And now in order to get to the third computer, in order to find the domain admin user, I will wait for the last command that will run and then refresh. And I'll be able to see that I already have from the first PC through the second PC to the third PC, I'll be able to see that now I'm on DC1 and I have the domain admin user that I have. The error that you see on the screen in a second will tell you that you managed to get a domain admin user with the hash of the password, and here you can see the results of everything. So DC1 with administrator user and the hash of the password. So that's the automated process of Bloodhound with Go Fetch. Obviously, it's something that we don't know if it exists today. Maybe in nation-state attackers, something like that can actually happen. And obviously, if we really think about that, we're turning the weeks into hours. So if now, in order to get domain dominance, I can get it by hours, let's think what can happen with the months. So if I'm looking at today regular activities now, before I came to Russia, I realized that there is another version of Alexa, which is called Alisa. So I didn't change it in my presentation, but it's the same concept. So let's say that I want to order the best pizza in Russia. So I say, hey Alisa, I want to order pizza to my hotel room. So it looks at my connection, where I'm located, what is the rate of the vendor, what is my buyer history, available delivery companies, and then make sure that in Google Maps or in Waze or whatever, I can get into the shortest path, and then it takes my credit card because it's saved already in my account, and then I get my pizza. Interesting. Let's take it into cyber attacks. So let's take a scenario that we have Darth, that Darth, please target company X, and Darth can basically do an open source intelligent gathering on a certain company. So who are the users that exist over there? Then take personal information, credentials, network orientation and infrastructure, locate the crown jewels, find easiest access path, and then eventually exfiltrate the data from the organization itself. Now this is a scary topic, and obviously something that doesn't exist today as we know, but think about the future of cyber attacks, and that can be pretty concerning. Now, if I look into you have an interesting word here, debris, and debris is basically garbage. So the garbage we have in the network is basically from our day-to-day activity. I connect to your computer, you connect to my computer to help out with some technical problem, and we leave behind a lot of garbage in our network just from the day-to-day activity that we have inside the organization itself. So how can we deal with something like that, and not just few machines, but I'm talking about scale. I'm talking about tens of thousands of computers in an organization that leave behind a lot of garbage. So we want to see how we can address that. So what we did a sort of a research on our own. We took from Elusive Networks, we took customers of ours that we collected it from around 200,000 computers from these sectors that you see behind me. So we're talking about legal, healthcare, finance, telecom, and so on. And the data we collected is domain admins that cached in systems, shadow admins, accounts, high-risk connections to critical system, and then unmanaged local admin accounts. So we took all of that and we tried to break it down into the main problems that we managed to find over there. And what we see is, first of all, the privileged access management tool, that it looks like they are protected, but what we see from the results is that 80% don't even see their privileged groups and users. So let's say that you have a PAM solution, but you're not covering your privileged accounts because you cannot you just cannot see them. Then you're in a big problem in terms of vulnerability. So lateral movement can become much more easy because I'm not covering all of these accounts with PAM solution. And what we also saw, which was pretty interesting, is that they cannot verify if their password was actually rotating throughout the time, which was, again, an interesting item. In terms of what we managed to find under the hood, so we were focusing on those saved user connections like AWS keys and browsers, save information, SSH, and so on. RDP sessions, that was a big finding. So I connected to a neighbor computer over RDP, and all I did, I just clicked the X sign at the bottom of the session, and I left open RDP sessions that attackers can use. Unmanaged local admin users and shadow admins. So the result shows a lot of interesting information. So 100% of the organizations have errant privilege accounts. 20% of the endpoints have cache privilege accounts. This is huge. And also from our perspective, it was a big surprise because organizations, they have a lot of security controls in place. So how is it even possible that we're in this situation? 70% of the endpoints have local admin with group password, so AA112345 So they are sharing a password across the entire organization, which is obviously not best practice. So if I take all of that and put it into examples, so these three examples about healthcare, we have manufacturing, we have financials, and I'll focus on one just because of time. So the left-hand side, we're talking about a lot of computers over there at this account. They implemented a new security solution that was supposed to check their registry intact. So they roll out this agent, and what they could see was very interesting. They saw that this platform was actually authenticating to all of these computers in the network with domain admin credentials. And then when we roll out our part of Attack Surface Manager, we could see that on every single endpoint machine server in the network exists a domain admin user. And the big one that we took from it is that no other product even saw that. And that was the feedback we got from these clients. And we have a lot of examples that obviously I can share later on if needed. And if we're talking about, pressing the brakes a little bit or pumping the brakes a little bit, how do you paralyze the attacker when you have so many problems like this and the existing security controls have some difficulties with? So first of all, limit the attack options. So take away from the organization the domain admins, the privileged users that currently we have in our network. Second of all, remove cache connections to critical systems, your Swift system, your user systems, your Active Directory, and so on. Why would someone from HR will have RDP sessions stored to the domain controller? It doesn't make sense. They don't need it for their day-to-day activity. And then mine the attack surface with deception, so place fake information for the attacker in order to paralyze the attackers. So I'm talking about a situation like this. So if this is your network today, from the attacker's perspective, not from the defender's perspective, I have a lot of options. So first of all, let's identify those unwanted user credentials and connections, and then eliminate them. We don't need them, so let's take them away. And then identify your crown jewels, and based on the crown jewels, plant fake deceptions or fake information that looks exactly like the regular connections and users in the organization, and then detection is becoming inevitable. If your organization looks like this, with a lot of deceptions, and attackers are trying to navigate around, and we know that the cost of using a user or a connection is zero for the attacker, they will use all of them. And for you, you'll be in a situation that is different than what you see in front of us. We're talking about approaches that attackers needs to be right once, and the defenders needs to be right 100% of the times. With the deceptions concept, the defender needs to be right once, and the attackers must be right every time. Once they're detected, we bring forensics information from a compromised machine. We make sure that we cover the entire cycle of taking away unwanted connections and credentials, plant deceptions everywhere, and then collect information about the attacker. Thanks.